I discovered 3 terrifying beach house horror stories that will haunt your dreams. I never should have opened that door. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. A cozy beach house, the sound of waves crashing outside, and salty breeze drifting through the windows. But as I stepped onto the creaky floorboards, a chill ran down my spine. The sun had set, leaving an unsettling darkness creeping into every corner of the rooms. The shadows seemed to whisper secrets. I could feel them watching me. The kitchen had an odd smell, like something rotting. I shook it off, thinking it was just old wood and dampness. As I moved deeper into the house, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. It hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My heart raced. Strange noises echoed through the empty halls. A thud, then a soft shuffle. I turned, but nothing was there. Just me and the shadows, which danced along the walls like sinister figures. The living room was awash in murky darkness. A single window, clouded with grime, let in the faintest glimmer of moonlight. I approached a dusty old cabinet. Gritting my teeth, I yanked open the door. Inside, a collection of photo albums stared back at me. I flipped through the faded pages, only to find pictures of strangers, their faces twisted with something unnameable, a fear that spoke across decades. A cold sweat trickled down my back. Then the noises grew louder, scraping and tapping coming from the bedroom. I hesitated at the threshold, heart thudding like a hammer. The chilled air wrapped around me like a vice, and I blinked, half expecting something to jump out. And then I heard it, a soft, plaintive whisper. "Help me." The sound curled around my ears, wrapping my mind in a clammy grip. My body moved before I could think. I was drawn toward the source, adrenaline surging through my veins. The door creaked open slowly, and I was met with impenetrable darkness. The hairs on my arms stood tall, bristling with fear. I dared to step inside, each breath a silent prayer. Just as I reached for the light switch, a loud bang echoed from behind me. The front door slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. My heart dropped into my stomach. I spun around, adrenaline coursing through my body. And that's when I saw it. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The figure hovered just beyond the doorway, shrouded in darkness, its outline shifting like smoke. It was indistinct, flickering at the edges of my vision. I felt its gaze piercing through the deep void toward me, a malevolent energy that made the air grow thicker with every moment. Moments stretched into eternity as we stared at one another, my breath catching in my throat. Suddenly, a flicker of light burst forth from the window, casting brief shadows that revealed the figure more clearly. A woman, her skin pale as if untouched by the sun, stood there. But her eyes, those deep, hollow pits, held an anguish that sent ice coursing through my veins. A life of despair written on her face, twisted and contorted as though trapped between two worlds. "Help me," she rasped again, her voice a drawn-out echo, barely a whisper, as if it came from the depths of the ocean rather than her lips. My heart raced, and for a moment, I was overcome with the desire to reach out and pull her from whatever cage bound her to this place. But instinct screamed at me to run. The light flickered again, plunging the room back into darkness. I turned to flee back into the living area, but the chilling realization washed over me that something was different. The shadows no longer curled like sentient beings, they expanded, fundamentally rearranging the space, closing in on me, transforming the hallways into a labyrinth of dread. As dread pooled in my chest, I felt a sharp tug at my sleeve. The woman was right behind me, cold breath brushing against my neck. "Please don't leave me," she begged, her voice now a desperate shriek, thin and wavering like the last cry of a dying bird. My vision blurred, the shadows deepening to suffocating blackness. I stumbled backward, my thoughts racing as I struggled to make sense of the reality unraveling around me. The chill of her breath sent shockwaves of terror through my blood, and I twisted away from her grasp, bolting back to the living room, but the front door stood barred, as though it had melded with the walls, sealed by some unseen force keeping me prisoner. Panic gripped me as I pressed my palms against the rough surface, pounding desperately against the wood, my pleas drowned by the noises that now erupted all around, the whispers, the distant sounds of laughter, a chaotic chorus of sorrow and craving that I whirled to face the room, my eyes desperately searching for an escape. The shadows writhed across the walls, pulling away from an old mirror that hung crookedly. It reflected a nightmarish distortion of the room, twisting it into grotesque shapes. But when I looked closely, I saw her reflected not just in the glass but in the very fabric of the air. The woman was trapped within, her eyes wide with panic, every feature warped in agony. Join me, her voice enveloped me, sweet and poisonous. You can't escape. They know you're here. At the edge of my consciousness, something stirred an urge to reach toward her, to rescue her from the prison of her own suffering. I took a step forward, but the shadows surged, crawling up my legs like serpents, dragging me back. A chorus of tortured souls began to rise, their wails piercing through my sanity. Suddenly, a blinding light shot from the mirror, illuminating the room in a stark, white brilliance and casting away the darkness. I glimpsed the faces of the lost, a collective surge of terror that paraded before me. Realization gripped me. They weren't just trapped, they were hunting. Then it hit a deafening crash in the hallway. I turned, heart pounding, to see the ancient wooden cabinet shatter against the wall, its contents spewing forth like a broken dam. Out of the chaos emerged figures, ghostly apparitions, faces contorted into an expression of despair, clawing toward me, seeking more than mere existence. With the eerie light still illuminating the room, the mirror's surface rippled, revealing a vortex of endless swirling horror. I stumbled back, every instinct screaming for me to run, but the apparitions filled the space, cutting off any hope of escape. The woman in the mirror screamed, her form flickering between despair and rage. In this maelstrom of supernatural chaos, I felt an unmistakable weight shift. The shadows coalesced, and suddenly, I was being pulled toward the mirror, not as a victim but as an offering. Become one of us. The wail echoed, morphing into myriad voices as I neared the chaos. Before I could comprehend what was happening, I was falling into the mirror, into their world of darkness, into the echo chamber of souls longing for release. I reached out with a final, desperate grasp, but instead, grabbed hold of something cold and slick, something pulling me deeper, and then, nothing. The room fell silent. The light vanished, leaving only the hollow whispers of those trapped within. For a moment, I dared to hope I was free, but as I looked up, I saw her haunting face smiling back at me through the mirror. The door creaked open behind me, revealing a new figure stepping inside, hooded and glimmering, breathing a sinister welcome. My heart sank. There was still no escape, only the beginning of another horror to unfold. The moment the hooded figure crossed the threshold, an icy wind swept through the room, snuffing out the last remnants of warmth. I felt the shadows squeeze tighter around me, a serpent's embrace, as I struggled to comprehend the creature before me. Its face was obscured, lost beneath the billowing fabric that danced with malevolent energy. Yet even without seeing its features, I knew this was another harbinger of despair, a being conjured from the depths of my worst nightmares. Welcome, the figure breathed, its voice low and resonant, echoing around the room like a funeral dirge. The darkness thickened, swirling in on itself, mirrors of confusion reflecting back the dread that took residence in my chest. You have been chosen for what? I stammered, my heart racing. I could hear the laughter of the lost souls, a cacophony of voices that seemed to play in counterpoint to the horror unfolding. The walls themselves vibrated with tension, as if the house was an entity alive, aware of my fear, feeling my pain. The figure took a step forward, and an unnatural light flared briefly at its fingertips, illuminating the ground littered with remnants of shattered promises, faded photographs, letters with torn edges, and a child's toy, its paint chipped away by time. To be liberated, it whispered, casting the light onto my face. To become part of the everlasting banquet of souls. No more pain, only endless existence in our embrace that I watched as the light flickered around the figure, creating fleeting glimpses of what lay beneath the hood, fleeting shadows of bodies contorted in anguish, desperate faces crying out for salvation. The air grew thick with the stench of decay, and I staggered back, horrified. I refuse. Am not like them. The figure paused, tilting its head slightly, as if pondering my defiance. You think yourself free? It laughed, a hollow sound that rolled like thunder and dissipated into a strangled sigh. You're already entangled. Your fate was sealed the moment you crossed the threshold of this house. Suddenly, the mirror behind me pulsed with dark energy, drawing my attention once more. The woman's face was now twisted into an expression of malevolent glee, her once sorrowful eyes igniting with manic determination. Embrace the darkness. You are meant to be with us. She shrieked, her mouth curling into a grin that stretched too wide for her face. With a single motion, the hooded figure reached out its hand, and the shadows surged forward, dragging me to my knees. The wails of countless souls filled my ears, their cries rising into a tempest that threatened to engulf everything, including myself. The mirror's surface rippled, its depths calling to me with the promise of relief from this terror, a sanctuary where pain was merely a memory. Each voice was a thread tugging at the fabric of my sanity, weaving tales of despair and loss. I could feel their stories wrapping around my limbs, squeezing tighter like chains forged from agony. I looked up, panic flooding through me, finding my only salvation in the reflection staring back at me from the very heart of the mirror. The woman was gone, replaced by yet another figure, a child, no older than 6, her sunken eyes pleading with me. Help me, heart shattered at the sight, a wave of grief crashing over me that threatened to sweep me completely away. No. I want, but the shadows coiled tighter. The hooded figure stepped closer, its presence like ice settling into my bones, and I felt my strength waning. You will join us, it crooned, and then, in a voice that was both mine and not mine, it whispered, you're just like them wanting to be saved. The world around me began to shift and distort, the walls of the room bending inwards as if the house itself were collapsing in on its own malevolence. I was barely aware of the screaming. It was every enemy's own screams, the lost, and an unholy symphony of despair. Then, a sudden sharp beam of light erupted from the center of the mirror, emitting a sound that cut through the chaos, a single note, haunting and ethereal. It pulsed, illuminating the room in an otherworldly glow, causing the shadows to retreat warily. Now is your chance. A voice cried, sweet and innocent, a stark contrast to the darkness enveloping us. You can take my hand. But just as I turned toward the light, the ground buckled beneath my feet, dragging me back toward the void of despair. The figure loomed over me, fingers outstretched. Choose, it commanded. Join or be left behind. That I could feel the darkness yearning for my soul, wrapping around my essence, inexorably pulling me toward the abyss, where the echoes of the trapped souls prepared to mingle with my own. I teetered on the edge, grasping desperately for meaning, for hope, and then the ground split wide open. Before I could comprehend what was happening, I felt myself tumbling into a new realm, deeper than any I had faced thus far, every fall echoing the piercing cacophony of the lost. As I disappeared into the void, dread seeped into my core, and my final thought echoed silently through the darkness, what horrors awaited me in the shadows of the unknown. As I fell through the rift, the sensation of weightlessness seized me, my stomach churning as the darkness warped and twisted around me. The familiar sounds of despair faded, replaced instead by the sound of crashing waves and the sinister whisper of a chilling breeze that seemed to carry the cries of the damned. With a jarring thud, I landed in a cavernous chamber, damp and echoing with the groans of the unseen. The walls seemed to pulse as if breathing, slick with a sheen of brine that reflected unearthly glimmers of light cast by phosphorescent creatures skittering through the shadows. But the shimmer came with a groan, deep, sonorous sound that made my bones vibrate with the force of it, a warning and a welcome all at once. That I pushed myself to my feet, brushing the grit from my palms and absorbing my surroundings. A surging tide swelled in the distance, its waves whispering secrets as they crashed against unseen shores. Stacked against the walls were remnants of lost lives, chairs half-eaten by rust, logs blackened and twisted, and nets abandoned, tangled in a grotesque display that suggested the sea was not merely an environment but a crypt for the unwary. "Help me," the voice floated to me again, a desperate plea dripping with malice from somewhere in the shadows. My heart raced as I scanned the darkened corners, eyes wide with terror. Each crevice felt alive, filled with the remnants of souls desperate for liberation, resentment curling within them like smoke. Shadows writhed in the corners of my vision, growing longer and more chaotic, as the waves surged closer and closer, the briny air thick with the scent of damp earth and something more sinister, death. I stumbled forward, unsettled but drawn to a looming silhouette coming to life against the flickering light. The figure emerged from the depths, a skeletal adult dragging a child behind. They appeared grotesquely distorted, as if crafted from the very essence of suffering and despair. "Fate has brought you here," the adult croaked, its voice a scraping whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "Are you lost, child? Or found?" The child looked up at me, face smeared with dirt and painted with tears that glistened crimson under the dim light. "They're waiting," the child whimpered, pointing towards the crashing surf where the waves churned darkly, like flesh heaving and rolling. "Join us," panic tightened around my throat. "Who are they? What do you mean?" I felt my voice shake, echoing into the vast emptiness. But instead of responding, the adult reached out, its skeletal hand trembling as it beckoned me closer. "We are bound to the sea," it rasped. "For eternity, we await our release. Join." A piercing shriek echoed above the sound of the waves, the euphony of grief climbing to a crescendo as shadows twisted further, growing darker and more sinister, taking on forms that were simultaneously familiar and unimaginable. Faces wailing in agony emerged from the depths of the water. Their mouths stretched wide in silent screams, eyes bulging as they reached toward me, desperate for freedom or perhaps for vengeance. My instincts screamed at me to run, to escape this nightmare. But curiosity tethered me, transforming my fear into something more puzzling, an insatiable longing to understand what bound these lost souls to this wretched place. I stepped closer to the edge of the chamber, drawn by the depths of the water, sensing an intense pull that whispered of my own past. The echoes of broken promises washed over me, mixing with memories I hardly recognized. "Help us," the child pleaded again, a ghastly grimace etched upon its face. "Help us, before they come for you." I turned to jerk back, but before I could retreat, the waves surged higher, boiling and frothing, spiraling into a whirlpool that exuded an insatiable hunger. I staggered as they began to latch onto my ankles, an all-consuming force that threatened to pull me under. The adult screeched into my ear, the sound shattering reality, "You will join our depths." My breath came in sharp gasps as I felt sharp claws grasping and tugging, cold, clammy, raiding my very essence. The whispers grew louder, filling the air with promises of release and ruin. I glanced back at the child, whose expression was frozen in horror. "Stay away from the light." It screamed just as the swirling water erupted, billowing darkly upward like a ravenous beast. In that moment, the terror crystallized, revealing itself in its true shape. I was not only being dragged into their realm, I was becoming part of their tale of anguish, a tale woven by despair, and at that very moment, the realization felled me like a stone dropped into the abyss. The echoes of souls reached a deafening crescendo, mingling with the child's last horrific words, "You're just like us," and then, everything shattered. As the darkness enveloped me, I felt the ground beneath my feet vanish, and the truth enveloped me as I was swept into the depths, the last glimmer of hope receding like the tide, leaving behind only the dreadful promise of an eternal nightmare. What was waiting at the murky bottom? And was there a way back to the light, or had I willingly stepped into a fate worse than death? The clutches of the tide pulled me deeper, wrapping around my legs like an iron chain, dragging me into the dark, cold embrace of the sea. I gasped, but the water filled my mouth, bitter and acidic, burning my throat. Panic clawed at my chest as I flailed, my hands reaching for anything to pull me back, but the shadows slicked against my skin, binding me in a fierce grip. In the depths, I felt the weight of countless eyes watching me, a multitude of unseen beings rising from the dark. Their faces blurred and twisted in the gloom, reflecting sorrow, joy, anger, and despair, an otherworldly gallery of suffering. All the while, the ghastly voices rose and fell like a haunting melody, speaking words I couldn't comprehend, yet somewhere deep inside I felt their urgency. "Join us," they intoned, their voices a cacophony of longing that resonated within my bones. Become one with the tide, desperation surged within me, a primal instinct to survive clawing at the edges of my consciousness. I had to fight, to resist the drowning darkness and the songs of the damned beckoning me into their fold. With every muscle straining, I pushed against the grip of the water, gasping for breath as the surface seemed to tease me from a distance, waves crashing with a reminder of what I yearned to return to, a world bursting with light and life. Suddenly, a surge of warmth enveloped me. A beacon emanated from somewhere beyond the depths, eclipsing the darkness momentarily. My heart raced as I strained against the tide, fighting against the pull of that ghostly glow. I swam toward it with fervor ignited by hope, the melody shifting into something more sinister, an ominous tone that set my teeth on edge. "Do not deny your calling," it crooned, the voice wrapping around me like a serpent. "You have a part to play in this requiem." I forced my arms to move, kicking through the thick water as the light flickered away into the abyss, taunting me. My lungs screamed for air, but I pushed through, exhaling bubbles that refracted the light into a cosmic dance as they drifted upward. And then I saw its surface breaking apart like glass, revealing the grotesque faces of the lost rising alongside me, their anguished mouths opening wide, ready to consume. No. I screamed, the sound muffled by the oppressive water as I felt hands, cold, gripping hands clutch at my body, dragging me back. The faces twisted in malicious glee, drawing energy from my terror as I felt their shadows tap into my very essence, siphoning my will to resist. The child's face appeared in front of me, eyes wide and pleading, yet the smile that crept onto its mouth twisted and became something inhuman. "Join us," it wailed, its voice fraying at the edges, cracking between innocence and malice. "We're all waiting." "It's beautiful." With one last surge of determination, I broke free, perhaps propelled by sheer will or the instinctual drive to survive. I pushed upward, striking out against the silent choir that sought to capture me, the cacophony reaching a fever pitch as the surface drew near. I could almost seize it, grasp the sunlight that beckoned just above, but as I reached for the light, a malevolent force surged beneath me, an unseen hand clawing at my feet and spiraling me downward once more. The buoyant force of air slipped through my fingers, leaving me no choice but to plummet back into the depths. The pressure closed around me with brutal finality, a merciless embrace. The warmth slipped away, replaced by icy claws that tore at my flesh, dragging me back into the yawning maw of shadows. I felt my heart race, pounding in time with the dreadful symphony of the damned. Then, from the blackness below, a whisper pierced through the cacophony, uttering the words that froze my blood. "You will never leave." Suddenly, the water around me thickened, greasy and viscous, coiling tighter like a serpent poised to strike. I struggled, but my limbs grew sluggish, weighted down by a dread beyond comprehension. The last of my breath escaped, bubbling up around me, and there, in the depths, I glimpsed a new horror, an enormous, shadowy figure moving against the current, its features obscured by the murk, its eyes glowing with a haunting malevolence. Just as it began to converge atop me, the world behind my eyes flickered, reality fracturing as I engaged in a chaotic dance with darkness itself. Clawing hands reached for me from every side, and a scream boiled up from my throat, a raw, unscripted sound that became lost in the engulfing void. Then it hit me: what if I wasn't battling alone? What if those I had thought long lost were with me? The memories of laughter, warmth, and love, each one wrapping around my heart even as I was torn between light and dark. I saw their faces, these fragments of my life, glowing faintly through the oppressive gloom, urging me to remember who I was. As I surrendered to the chaotic embrace of the depths, the light began to flicker, and in one final burst of clarity, I realized the truth. It was not only the shadows gathering for me. It was something far worse, something relentless that waited just outside the boundaries of time. And as my vision dimmed, the last thing I saw was the infinite shadow rushing towards me, mouth gaping wide, ready to accept me into the fold of its endless hunger. In that moment, I understood that not just the damned awaited my arrival, but a far more dreadful entity that yearned to claim what remained of my shattered spirit. Fleeting consciousness pooled around me like the remnants of a shattered dream. I drifted in and out as shadows jockeyed for my attention, tugging at the frayed edges of my mind. Each whisper ignited phantom fears, remnants of my deepest regrets rising like twisted phantoms from the abyss. The familiar warmth of the sun felt like a relic from another life, one now buried beneath layers of sorrow and despair, but reality was splintering further. I was no longer merely submerged, I was weightless, suspended in a liminal space where the echoes of past voices twisted and morphed into something grotesque. Each fragment of familiar laughter morphed into sinister giggles, every caring whisper devolving into a howling wail of agony. I tried forming thoughts, but they slipped away like sand through my fingers. Suddenly, I found myself hurled through a corridor of darkness, where jagged shapes loomed, forming a nightmarish landscape loaded with echoes of my own psyche. Sights swam before my eyes, a sandcastle, left to disintegrate beneath the weight of sorrow, a torn beach towel, faded from the sun, where love once thrived, and the distant ripples of waves that shimmered like veins on the surface of a relentless beast. From the shadows, a wretched figure emerged, pulling at my leg with clammy, unyielding fingers. It was the child again, its face now fraught with despair and longing. "Come to us," the figure croaked, its voice laced with sorrow, "you have to let go. It's what we've all chosen." I recoiled, but the force of the currents drew me closer to the apparition. The child's eyes were no longer innocent, they pulsed with a knowledge far beyond its years. "This is where happiness hides," it claimed, a cruel smile widening on its lips. "You can join us, away from the burden of those you lost." As I hovered at the precipice of submission, a surge of unnameable fear coursed through me. The reality began to warp, the black depths pulsated rhythmically, revealing fleeting glimpses of monstrous entities writhing just beyond the veil. From the farthest reaches of this lost dimension, a deafening roar reverberated, the voice of that unseen entity echoing through the murk, swallowing every last flicker of hope. "Join me," it cried, its words curled around the edges of my mind, threatening to unravel everything I was. I felt the pull of its gravity, a nightmarish compulsion to abandon the shore of my former life, to sink into the inky depths where silence and dismembered souls entwined. Horrified and entranced, I fought to reclaim myself, my arms flailing against the tightening grip of tentacles formed from despair. I thought of the people I loved, of laughter ringing through the air like music, of hands woven together during summer days, of moments so pure that they burned brightly against the encroaching darkness. But as flashes of their smiles danced away from me, I could feel the void reaching deep, pulling me toward the doom festering behind the shadows. "How many sacrifices will it take?" the child whispered, its voice morphing into a chorus of the lost. I felt the weight of their souls, those who had forsaken light, hungering for me to join their eternal lament. "All your memories lead back to this moment. Embrace the inevitability." That I gazed into the encroaching blackness, spotting myriad eyes, a multitude of lost souls illuminated by an eerie glow. They stared back at me, weighed down by a hunger that transcended mortal understanding, yearning for the taste of my fear, of my surrender. Then the child's form began to shift, its face melt into an infinite maw filled with gnashing teeth, echoing the reminder that I was more than my fears, I was a part of this never-ending nightmare. I thrashed against the currents, and the world exploded with sound that shattered the barrier of my mind. With a gasp, I snapped awake, yet the wet darkness remained. I was transported back to my body, lying on the shifting sand of the beach, trembling in the aftermath of my ordeal. The storm raged around me, howling like a wounded animal, and the moon hung large and ominous in the sky, but the ambience felt different, charged with dread, as though the shoreline was alive with dark purpose. My heart thudded in my chest as I scrambled to stand, grains of sand filling every crevice of my being, each one a reminder of the entity's whispers tugging at my thoughts. The boundary between waking and dreaming blurred as figures danced along the water, shimmering with death's promise, and that's when I saw it, the child, standing at the water's edge, grinning with the malevolence of ages past, waiting for me to take that final step into oblivion. "Will you join us?" it beckoned, the void behind it alive with a hunger that could not wait. A thunderous cracking sound filled the air as the shoreline split apart. I staggered back, heart racing, as the sand began to pulse, threatening to swallow me whole, the waves curling menacingly around the shore like fingers ready to drag me back into the depths. In that chilling moment, every instinct screamed for me to run, but as I turned to flee, the other figures emerged from the shadows, each one a piece of my past, faces I had never wanted to see again. The child's eyes met mine, radiating beckoning terror just as their haunting wails began to echo through the storm. "Your choice," they whispered in unison, and before I could grasp what was happening, the ground beneath me began to crumble away. With every bit of trembling resolve, I lunged toward the only escape, but the very earth seemed intent on holding me back, dragging me into its depths just as another figure stepped forward. "Stay," it begged, its voice wound in a terrifying softness. The realization struck me harder than the tidal waves. It wasn't just the tides pulling me down, it was the memories of who I had been fighting with the relentless hunger of what could be lost forever. As I felt the darkness close in, and a chilling wave washed over me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The ground trembled beneath me, ribbons of darkness weaving through the sand, creeping closer like a living thing. I felt my resolve falter, the insistent pull of the abyss whispering sweet nothings of surrender to me, promising solace in the depths. I fought the urge to look back at the writhing figures, at the dead eyes of my past beckoning from the shadows. Instead, I surged forward, propelled by sheer instinct. "Run! Just run!" I screamed into the wind, but no sound emerged, only a breathless gasp swallowed by the howling storm. I stumbled, my legs heavy as though mired in thick sludge, each step feeling like I was dragging the remnants of my own soul with me. But the ground beneath me bucked violently, as if it resented my escape, shuddering with each frenzied heartbeat. As I finally broke into a desperate sprint, the world warped into a grotesque carnival of colors swirled around me, each hue steeped in an unnameable dread. The waves lashed against the shore, crashing with primal fury, and I could feel the water's icy fingers clawing at my heels. A resounding roar erupted from the oceanic creature thrashing under the surface, wanting to free itself from its watery prison. Running along the beach, I felt an almost magnetic pull toward the remains of an old lifeguard station looming in the distance. Its cracked wood and broken windows looked like hollow eyes staring out into the void, warring against the dismal atmosphere of gathering shadows. "Help! Please!" I cried out, the sound barely reaching my ears, distorted as though the storm consumed my pleas. I lunged for the building, hoping against hope that I might find sanctuary within its decaying walls. I stumbled through the splintered door, the air stagnant and thick with the scent of mildew and salt. I felt a flicker of intelligence resonate within the structure, as though it was aware of the horrors lurking just outside. The debris scattered on the floor whispered secrets of despair: a half-buried surfboard, an old first aid kit, the faded echo of laughter from a sun-drenched past. Amidst my chaotic thoughts, I heard it, the whispering chorus of those who had been lost. I pressed my palms against the grimy glass of a window, peering out into the tumult. They stood there, figures twisted in both time and spirit, grotesque caricatures of love lost. Their faces warped between nostalgia and sorrow, emotions echoing through their hollowed eyes: parents, friends, the child, all just out of reach but nothing more than shifting shadows. "It's not safe here," a voice hissed from the corner, sending ice through my veins. I turned to see a man seated against the wall, his face drawn and weathered, eyes wide with dawning terror. "They'll come for you, just like they came for me." "Who? What is happening?" I gasped, choking on fear. He raised a trembling finger to his lips, indicating silence. The storm raged outside, but within the lifeguard station, the atmosphere thickened, choking off the very air I needed to escape. Beyond the brittle wooden rafters, I could hear them stirring outside, an unearthly cacophony of cries and laughter weaving through the night. The voices of the lost, now sharper, desperate, bruised, itching to reclaim what they believed was theirs. The man leaned closer, his breath hot against my ear. "They're drawn to your pain," he rasped. "Like moths to flame, all doomed souls resonate with their suffering. They want to ensnare you. What do I do?" Panic surged through me as the shadows in the room around me thickened, swirling like smoke, twisting towards the door. "Join us," echoed the chorus of voices, becoming clearer, rising above the din. They caressed my ears, familiar and forbidding all at once, luring me with honeyed promises. I turned to the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The man's face twisted in anguish, shadowed eyes imploring me. "Don't let them in. Whatever you do, don't look back. but I could feel them. The pressure against my vision seeped into my bones. I turned slowly, the urge to look back becoming unbearable, magnetic. I felt their sorrow curling around me like a suffocating vine. Faceless memories floated at the edges of my mind, and just as fear crawled back inside my gut, I caught a glimpse of darkness spilling in through the threshold. Before I could stop myself, I committed the ultimate sin of curiosity and glanced back. My breath hitched, and my heart fell into the futility of despair as the figures collided together, a swirling mass of plaintive expressions and ghostly forms. They were beckoning, their mouths moving without sound, and I gasped in horror, lips trembling as doubt consumed me. In that moment, the waves crashed harder against the shore, and the walls began to vibrate with unnatural energy, vibrating with a frequency that seemed to echo the lost soul's lament. The ground shook violently as the burden of countless regrets pressed against me, threatening to engulf me within the darkness, lapping hungrily at the periphery of my vision. No. I screamed, grasping the counter, as chills raced through my body. I ripped my gaze away from their haunting call, but not before I caught a glimpse beyond the haze. Was that a familiar face amongst them? A face I had thought forgotten. In the depths of my grief, the storm intensified, and the voice of the child reverberated against the backdrop of chaos. "We are waiting," it sang with an all-consuming grin, echoing through the lifeguard station. "You can't escape your fate." With horror blossoming in my chest, I felt the pressure rise, a storm of shadows flooding in from all sides, enveloping me, holding me in place while the chorus swelled around me. Just as the darkness closed in, I shoved open the door, screaming against the tempest. But as I stepped outside, what awaited me was far worse than I could have ever imagined. The beach had transformed, the horizon gone, and only a void of pulsating shadows remained, each pulse thrumming with a darkness far more terrible than I could understand. And then it hit me, every face in that dreadful crowd began to turn towards me, smiling with a malicious, knowing joy. I stood frozen in terror, blood running cold as the very earth beneath me rippled, throbbing like a living wound. "Your choice, will it be despair or join us?" they chanted in unison. The ground shuddered, splitting apart further, and I felt the tendrils of the abyss inch closer, grasping at my thoughts, the phantoms lunging for me with insatiable hunger. I was about to be consumed, but among the wails and cries, one whispered voice cut through the torment, resonant and familiar yet steeped in long-forgotten pain. "Remember me?" It taunted softly, and every ounce of breath left my body as time faltered. Staring into the void, I couldn't tell where the shadows ended and reality began. And that voice echoed in the dark, "You must choose." The darkness thickened, curling around me like a shroud. My body trembled, caught between a primal urge to flee and a sickening curiosity that clawed at my mind. I could feel the weight of their gaze bearing down, hungry for recognition, for acknowledgement. The fractured ground beneath me groaned, a lamentation that melded with the cries of the lost. "Choose." They wailed, a symphony of anguish that vibrated through my bones, sending shards of ice into my veins. Shadows flickered, stretching across the sand and into the depths of an unfathomable night. Those faces, recognizable yet distorted, seemed to pulsate with a desperate need for communion. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice swallowed by the approaching storm, every word an invocation, an offering laid bare. They surged forward, and I stumbled back, feeling my heels catch on the deluge of sand. Flashes of memories ignited before me, wave after wave crashing. A laughing child in the arms of a father, a soft melody sung while drifting in twilight, the warmth of love now turned cold. I pressed my palms against my ears, desperate to drown out the memories clawing for my attention. "Join us." They chanted again, a unison bound by sorrow, and in that moment, something within me shattered. No. The word clawed its way past my lips, raw and defiant, igniting a flicker of rebellion. I turned, forcing my aching legs to move, driven by pure instinct to escape the terrible familiar embrace of the shadows. They writhed, a sea of ink-black tendrils reaching out, their unresolved pain slicing through the air, each whisper a note of despair. They lunged at me, their spectral forms distinct now, each one defined by familiar rife empty-eyed gazes and twisted smiles. The child Emily was flickering in and out of existence, a ghostly silhouette caught between realms. I could almost touch her if I dared just reach further into the void. "Mommy, it's dark here. Come with us," she called, her voice echoing with a childlike innocence that cut deeper than any knife. I could feel her warmth seeping into my memories, the sweetest ache of love and loss. Anguish enveloped me, a maelstrom of guilt clawing at my heart. "Emily, no." I felt bile rise in my throat, the truth biting like acid. I fought against it, all the pain and regrets pressing against my soul, begging me to succumb to the darkness. As the wailing chorus swelled in intensity, the abyss beneath me began to deepen, a swirling whirlpool of darkness threatening to swallow me whole. And yet, I couldn't stop turning back, compelled by my guilt, propelled by the horror I had tried so desperately to bury. "With us." They beckoned, their eyes flaring with an unholy light, shadows dancing joyfully as they reached for me, fingers outstretched to clasp me in a shared regret. The world tilted, and as I stumbled further into the depths of the void, time came crashing down around me. Suddenly the air shifted, thick with the essence of forgotten dreams and broken promises, swirling violently around like a dreadful storm. One of the figures, a towering silhouette draped in darkness, raised its hand and all fell silent, as if the very air had gone stale. "You will listen to your heart now," it rasped, voice low and reverberating. "You must choose. Stay trapped in your torment or join the weight of those who desire your pain." Pulses of dread sizzled along my skin, a dance of expectation, every heartbeat echoing the choices laid bare. Was it selfishness that brought me here? The desperate need to sever the strings that bound me to guilt and despair? Then, just as clarity began to pierce through the haze, the figure revealed its face, contorting into a grotesque vis-a-vis mirage reflecting fragmented pieces of my own heart. Innocent features twisted with sorrow, it was no one I recognized, yet somehow everyone. All at once did I heard myself gasp, deeper memories clawed at the edges of my consciousness, threatening to drown me in recognition. "You know how this ends. You can't run from your fate, it will always find you," the figure whispered, its voice laced with an insistent call. "What do you choose?" Time seemed to stretch. With every ounce of will, I turned away, determined to break free from the tempest brewing inside, but just then, a piercing laugh erupted from behind me, sending chills that sank deep into my very being. "If you walk away now, you'll lose her forever," the voices echoed back, singing my fate in a morbid chant. I bore witness to the kaleidoscope of faces before me brimming with unbearable resolve, clawing to climb over each other toward the threshold, their collective grief swelling and writhing with desperation. They reached for the remnants of my soul, drawing ever nearer until a shimmering light broke through the darkness like a lighthouse in the storm. "What if I said I'd choose?" I cried into the void, teetering between despair and hope. "What if I want?" But the light began to flicker, as shadows engulfed it ravenously, consuming the brilliance that had offered salvation. And in that moment, engulfed by fear and anger, everything spiraled into chaos. Familiar voices cried out, drawing me deeper, wrenching my thoughts into a vortex of longing and dread, a siren song promising hope while chaining me to despair. "Choose." They erupted, and I felt a heart-stopping sensation engulf me, a vertigo of doubts, fears, and chasms unwilling to break. Just as I swung towards the abyss, a chilling whisper soft and sinister slithered through my ears again. "Join us, we await." The resonance roared through my mind, tethering me in place as the figures flickered back, their grinning mouths stretching wider, and before I could comprehend the finality of my choice, a pulse of darkness swept me off my feet. I was falling into the swirling voices. "Your choice is made. Welcome home," they beckoned in haunting chorus, and with a final rush, I plunged into the endless void. As I disappeared into the darkness, the last image seared into my mind was of those shadowy faces, and the child's voice, drifting off like a dying echo, "You'll never escape, we are always waiting." And then, nothing. The silence that followed was deafening, an oppressive weight that crushed against my chest. It enveloped me in a shroud of stillness, yet within that void, something primal stirred. My heart thudded irregularly, echoing in the emptiness like a persistent reminder of my pulse caught in a labyrinth of despair. I drifted through the absolute darkness, a sense of dislocation wrapping around me. My surroundings felt both familiar and alien, as if I had been here before in an iteration long forgotten. Then, a flicker of light pierced the inky black, illuminating the fog of my uncertain reality. I squinted against its brightness, the potential warmth filling me with an unsettling dread. Cautiously, I stepped toward it, drawn in by the luminous glow that seemed to pulse like the heartbeat I could no longer feel. With each movement, the ground beneath my feet solidified, coarse sand shifting back into familiar grains. Suddenly, I found myself standing on a beach, an unfathomable stretch of ebony sand staring back at me, waves lapping rhythmically at the shore, mirroring the sentient sway of the shadows that had pursued me, yet, where once I had flinched at the familiarity, a scream burgeoned in my throat, curling around the fear lodged deep within me. The ocean was alive, dark and roiling, sculptures of twisting forms thrashing within the depths, clawing their way up toward the surface. I shielded my eyes against a cruel sunit's rays, cold and harsh, illuminating grotesque figures crawling from the surf, their eyes dull voids that seemed full of anguish, but the worst was yet to come. In the haze of the horizon, a form coalesced, a towering structure, a decaying beach house nestled against the dunes, shifting with an ominous familiarity. My breath hitched as fragments of recollection unspooled, a summer long gone, laughter echoing against the walls, warmth and joy now poisonously tinged with loss. Welcome back, a voice taunted from behind me, smooth like satin but laced with venom. I whipped around to confront the specter, but found myself face to face with a reflection my own, yet not entirely. The person who stared back wore a twisted smile, eyes glinting with a sinister allure, as though the darkness had seeped into their very soul. "Help us find you," the doppelganger rasped, and I felt a surge of terror ripple through me, knotting my stomach in a vice. It lifted its arm, a finger extending toward the house, the very structure that had now become a perverse beacon. "How can you resist it? This is your home. We've been waiting. The others are already inside." Compelled by an unseen force, I felt myself turn toward the house, despite the pit of dread swirling in my gut. It loomed larger than I'd remembered, the windows dark and beckoning, whispering the allure of my past. The very air around it was thickening, exhaling unnatural breaths that mingled with the stench of decay as if it were a living entity. Groaning in anticipation, the porch creaked ominously beneath my step as I crossed the threshold with hesitant faith, nostalgia battling the foreboding. Whispered voices slithered out of the walls, a cacophony of familiarity and longing. Each room I entered resonated with memories of laughter twisted into horrific echoes. "Emily!" I gasped involuntarily. The name was a mantra, reverberating through the void where hope had once thrived, now twisted with loss. I rushed through the cluttered living room, the space mocking me with remnants of happier times. Photos hung crookedly on the walls, faces smiling in snapshots that obscured the shadow curling into Themis shroud drenched in grief. Then, out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement drew my attention, sending jolts of ice through my veins. I turned sharply to see a figure dart from the shadows, fleeting and fragile, a child, standing just outside the threshold of darkness. "Mommy, help me." The pleading voice clawed at my heart, familiar yet drenched in despair. The child's visage shimmered, ethereal and radiant, eyes wide with a vulnerability I knew too well. I wanted to reach out, to break through. The unrelenting grip of fear that confined me. As I fought against the lethargy that washed over me, a chilling realization crashed into my thoughts. This was a trick, the shadows baiting me to join their ranks. Yet, before I could flee, the doppelganger appeared beside me, grinning viciously. "You'll leave her here. This is where she belongs. Join us." Let the pain wash away. Desperation surged anew, but I was caught in an inescapable snare, the hollow eyes of the memories past pulling me back, begging for the same reunion. A sudden crash echoed from within the house, as if the very foundations were groaning, and the air crackled with unbridled anticipation. "There's more to discover," the creature hissed, lips curling into a mockery of a smile. "You just need to follow the light." With a burst of resolve, I turned to run, but the walls pulsateth house repositioning itself, closing off my route. "No. You cannot escape." I heard the voices wailing again, a haunting symphony repeating my name like a dark incantation. Desperation blurred my vision as glowing hands reached out from the corners of my mind, grasping, pulling. I darted toward the flickering light, a cloying warmth that promised safety, protection from the shadowy wrath that I and the next breath, everything shattered, the world exploded into chaos as I stumbled, tumbling within, the figure of my doppelganger merging seamlessly into the darkness, the laughter warping into a deranged chorus of joy. "Embrace us!" they roared, the tide of shadow rising, pulling me under, surrounding me in a rapturous embrace that I gasped, and as the last light flickered, their chorus crescendoed into a mad symphony, heart pounding against the encroaching void. As I felt myself sinking deeper into the grotesque web of memories, the enticing warmth morphed into a biting chill, one final realization piercing through the haze: welcome to the end, the voices cooed, and just as my consciousness began to slip beneath the surface, the child's voice broke free from the din, raw and desperate as it shrieked, "Don't leave me." And everything went dark. The stillness that enveloped me was like the abyss itself had yawned open, ready to swallow what remained of my essence. I held my breath, anticipation building, yet there was a suffocating weight to this darkness, one that burrowed deep into my soul. Time lost all meaning. I floated in a vacuum of despair, senses blurring yet still. I felt it, the echo of the child's plea. It resounded in my mind, a siren call that pulled me towards something, or someone. Help me! It was Emily's voice, sweet and haunting, echoing between the chasms of my mind, piercing through the clutches of night. I craved warmth, but the chill seeped deeper, bone deep, beckoning me back into the depths of nothingness. And then, a luminescent glow expanded from the void, illuminating fragments of memories. Images spiderwebbed across my vision, weaving together the threads of moments long buried. Sunlight dancing on her curls, laughter cascading like water. Emily's daughter was there, a radiant ball of light untainted by the horrors surrounding us. I felt a pulse, a race of hope sparking within me. With a sudden clarity, I surged toward the light, reaching, craving a reunion, a release from the shackles of darkness. As I collided with it, I was thrown into a cacophony of sensations. I gasped, feeling starlight pierce through my very being and pull me from the mire of despair. I emerged into a spectral form, standing on the precipice of the beach that had become a realm of torment. The tide lapped, yet the ocean seemed different now. Grotesque shapes twisted and writhed beneath its surface, cries of the lost resonated like a wailing choir from the shadows. "Not yet," a sinister voice whispered, weaving through my recollections like a venomous snake. I turned, heart pounding against the emotional storm gathering within. The shadows rippled around me, and there, emerging from the gloom, was my doppelganger, an abomination wearing my face, eyes glimmering with twisted glee. "You thought you could flee, where is she?" I spat, my voice a bare whisper against the rising tide. "Emily. You think she waits for you? You can't save her." And then, as if conjured by magic, figures swarmed around my hollow eyes of lost souls, visceral anguish shaping their forms as they drifted closer. Their unholy chorus rose, drowning me in despair. I staggered back, overwhelmed, feelings of helplessness washing over me as their sorrow echoed in my own heart. "Join us." The echoes coiled around me, intertwining with the darkest corners of my memories. "Become one with the endless suffering. You too can be free. Just let go." My heart raced, but in that chaos, I saw Emily's face shining through a crack in the darkness, alive, untouched, a beacon of hope shimmering against the currents of despair. No. I shouted, the sound almost lost in the swirling whispers. "I won't let you take me." And then, in a moment of sheer resolve, I realized the truth buried beneath layers of grief. The shadows, these lost souls, they were manifestations of my own anguish, of my fears that had crafted this nightmare. I understood now, perhaps the curse was driven not by the house, nor the tide, but by my own guilt, a desperate wish to escape the pain of her absence by joining them in regret. "Emily!" I cried, desperation clawing at my throat. A wave of energy surged as the light around me sparkled, pulling the shadows back, repelling the darkness as a barrier began to form. But the figure of my doppelganger stepped closer, every laugh twisted with malice. "What will it be? Your daughter, or the release we offer?" I locked eyes with my twisted reflection, ashes of lost dreams spilling from its mouth like poison. "You're a part of me, yes. But you will not consume me." With each word, The light ignited further, and I focused on the love I had for my daughter, the laughter we had shared that in an instant, I was hurled backward into the tender memory the last day we spent on the beach, the warmth of the sun lingering on our skin as we built castles and dreams. I could see her, the real Emily, her laughter echoing through my mind with delightful sweetness. I wove through the fabric of darkness, clutching onto the promise of her face like a lifeline, strengthening my resolve. Emily. I called out again, and suddenly, I wasn't just running toward a figment of her, but toward the very essence of hope. She represented an all-consuming flame casting away shadows. The tide, dark and menacing, surged closer, threatening to snatch away the bright light that glimmered in the distance. But when I reached that bright energy, when I threw myself into its embrace, everything shattered. I looked back one last time at the twisted shadows lunging toward me, faces of sorrow inching closer and closer before the light ignited, enveloping me whole. That I felt warmth, love, and a sense of home, and in that instant, I realized that it was never the shadows from which I needed to flee but the barriers of my own heart, the chains of guilt that had held me ransomed for far too long. They would linger, yes, but they no longer had power over me. As I opened my eyes, I found myself back on the beach, waves caressing my feet under the light of the full moon. But something felt chillingly wrong. I turned, expecting to see the house standing behind me, but it was gone. Not just the house, everything was gone. My heart thudded painfully against my chest. There were no shadows, no spirits beckoning from the ocean depths, no warning voices whispering to me now. But amidst the emptiness, I could hear her Emily, her laughter echoing in the distance. Mommy. Her voice rang out, bright and clear, as sweet as the sun illuminating the horizon, pulling me toward her. I ran, a rush of joy flooding through me as I stepped into the warmth of her embrace. I wrapped my arms around her, the very embodiment of what I had fought for, illuminating my heart, but when I pulled back to look into her eyes, a chill gripped my veins anew. The innocence of her expression began to flicker, morphing like shadows at sunset, just as her mouth twisted into a knowing grin. You let me down, Mommy. It's time to join us, and in that moment, the darkness crept back in, smiling as the tide surged forward. The last thing I felt before the world vanished was her cold hand grasping mine, the laughter resonating sweetly in the depths, followed by the whispered echoes of those who had long sought my return. This is only the beginning. As I was swept away, darkness clasping me tighter, I realized I had not escaped, that I only ensnared a new layer of torment.